BodyBags, where horror lies.
Guys, Rob from Georgia here with you. I'm your regular Wednesday evening host here at BodyBags. It is week 434. It's random week, and we are getting close to the end of February, and with that, another theme week, compliments of Lonnie. It is Love Horror. Looking forward to that. And then there is March. We can get into that a little bit towards the end of this thing. But it is random week, and I think it's I think the reason why I was drawn to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, partly I was surprised it had never been done before, but also having recently seen the new Scream. Of course, you start thinking Craven, you start thinking about self-reflective films, and so I kind of fell into the old, let's go revisit his New Nightmare and get into that. So compliments of my box, little franchise collection I picked up at Walmart years ago on the cheap. I occasionally still see this in there. So if for whatever reason you don't have the franchise, you just want to pick it up on the cheap, Walmart's usually a good place, not just for this. I mean, whether it's Puppet Master, Leprechaun, Saw, even Scream Factory is bringing in some of their boxes. The Fly, the Omen, the Critters box set, at a pretty affordable cost, right? So anyway, so I broke out my box. It's nothing special, it's nothing crazy. All the movies are in here, but unlike some of the way they package, they at least you know, got the discs in their individual things, which is nice. I've got a few on my shelf that you open it up and they're all stacked, and you gotta literally pull the whole Final Destinations like that. You gotta pull them all off like that, right? But anyways, a self-reflective film. It's interesting, right? This is the first one where Wes, you know, and he was, you know, he had a creative hand, I think, in part 3, but you got to go back to part 1 when Wes really was sort of forced to kind of let it go, and I think that hurt him. To watch where the franchise went after his stellar effort in 1984, which I saw in the movie theater when I was only 14, makes a nice indelible mark seeing a movie like that on the big screen when you're only 14. But seeing the rest of the franchise. And so by the time you get to, you know, into the 90s, he gets an opportunity to go back and revisit the original via a new story, which sort of lays a foundation for what he'll do to maybe in a better way, or I'm not sure, but Scream, right, in 1996, which will really take on a life of its own, and he'll give us 4 movies, and then unfortunately he'll leave us in 2015. But thankfully we got this new film that has, I think, done a pretty good job at tipping the hat to Mr. Wes Craven, and I'm hoping he's smiling as he sees this movie be as successful as it is. And so, but New Nightmare, it's interesting. You know, it calls to mind Lucio Fulci's Cat in the Brain, which opened up the decade that is the 90s. But it's not the first movie of its kind. I mean, there's a pretty long line of films going all the way back that are this type of nature of a film. But Lucio Fulci will say that Wes Craven ripped him off when he did New Nightmare. And it's, I don't know, it's interesting. When you look at the two films, I mean, if you're unfamiliar with his New Nightmare, basically the entire franchise, the way the story is, it's like, okay, so Wes's beef is, I think if I got this right, because the franchise really went off the track and, well, A, became worse and worse and worse as it went on, but B, ended, and by killing Freddy off or whatever. His approach seems to be one of, because you took the franchise off in this direction and it became what it became, a demon that had been trapped within this said franchise as a result of Freddy's, his character's death, is now trying to force his way out of the franchise, off the written page, as it were, off the screen, and into the real world as a very, very, very malevolent force. And so the only way to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, I guess, is to quickly make a new movie. So this is really a movie about a film in development, as those characters that we come to love so much from the original film and part 3, they start to succumb to a version of what they had grown so used to in the films, except now it's real. And so, Heather Langenkamp isn't playing, Nancy. She's playing herself, Heather. And that's what you have. Wes Craven's in here. Bob Shaye's is in here. You got John Saxon in here. There's a pivotal moment, a funeral scene where there is a collection of characters from earlier movies that are sort of just cameoing at this funeral. You've got was it his name, Nick, I think, the boyfriend who's blamed for killing Tina in the first movie. He's at the funeral. I think the girl from Nightmare on Elm Street 4, maybe, she's in there. So I mean, it's a really neat shot of the franchise encapsulated, I guess. He says on the commentary, which is really cool, that he's got a solo commentary track on this film. He says that he thought about reaching out to what's his name, Johnny Depp, but he was too afraid Johnny Depp would say no, so he never bothered. He ran into him years later. Some of you probably know this story. And Johnny Depp's reaction was, "Yeah, I would have been in there." And Wes Craven's like, "Go figure." And it's too bad he wasn't in it. That would have been pretty cool. In fact, but I was just thinking maybe even a greater role. But so really what you have is a film, the development of a film within a film. Think about Edgar Allan Poe. That quote that opens up on the fog, always seem to see but a dream in a dream. That sort of that quote. That's what I kept thinking about with this movie, because it opens up and you're on what you think is the opening frames of what is a new Nightmare on Elm Street film, when then you quickly realize it is the making of a film, and then you're with Nancy, or Heather, as she wakes up out of this nightmare. This whole thing has been a nightmare. And so a lot of the film feels like a film within a film. I don't know, it's weird. But it's interesting. So like, the makeup on Freddy's different. You got K&B though in this. You got Wayne Toth, of course. If you know Rob Zombie, Wayne Toth is his man with the makeup effects, the blood and the guts and everything else. The cinematographer, I did not know this, was David Cronenberg's main guy. Scanners, The Brood. I mean, all his major movies. In fact, he'll go on to actually shoot Scream for Wes, which is interesting. Trying to think, K&B, trying to think, this, yeah. Oh, and editor, Patrick Lussier, who worked with another guy, Todd Farmer. Of course, you probably know Patrick from directing the My Bloody Valentine remake in 3D. Yeah, so I mean, it's got a lot of cool hands in there working, right? I mean, anytime you have K&B in there, it's pretty cool. So this becomes, the movie becomes sort of this, I don't know. It's interesting. Nancy, or Heather, has to re-engage herself as Nancy, because the idea is, in order for the demon to completely break out and come into our world, for some reason, I guess, he has to go through the Nancy. Because the Nancy is the one who stood up to him. But I'm going to say this. I thought the more intriguing idea, which was not developed much at all, was Robert Englund's character as himself. There's a great scene where he's painting. I think he's had a nightmare, and he's just allowing it to come out out of his mind and onto the canvas. And what it really is this demon. This what sort of looks like a Freddy entity, but it's sort of its own thing, right? And it bothers him so much that he basically just leaves town, just leaves town. And so unfortunately, Robert Englund, except for a couple scenes, one that's actually kind of fun because he's actually playing his Freddy Krueger self. He's not in there, and it's a shame because I think Wes's comment on, I don't know, his comment seems to be more of his own disappointment of not being able to do more with the franchise as it developed over time than anything else. There's other subtext comment about violence in film and how does it affect us? Does it affect us? And I think he says on the commentary, you'd have to be sort of naive not to think that it's not having an impact on some level. But the Fulci film Cat in the Brain his is a little bit more really self-reflective in terms of the violence a director paints on screen and the impact it has back on him. And so for Fulci, it is the blurring of fantasy and reality in a much more personal way, right? For Craven's film, it's more sort of deep-seated angst at what has become of his franchise, if that makes sense. So it's not as quite as deep as Fulci's film, perhaps, maybe, but it is still a good film, and it's a fun film, and it's got some great moments. It's got some really good moments. Trying to think. Anyways, if you want to go back and reflect on the 90s, and there's any way you can get your hands on this, Fangoria issue number 200, there is a great, how's that, about 5.5 page piece on the 90s, the decade of the 90s, which was absolutely fascinating. And it reminded me, in short, that, the 90s actually was kind of fun. I mean, for me personally, the X-Files, of course, I mean, that was like maybe one of the only TV shows I've ever got sucked into from beginning to end. I'm just not a TV show guy. But if the decade opens up with, an Academy Award winner in Silence of the Lambs, and the decade will close itself out with at least a nominated film in the was it The Sixth Sense? But in between, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that comes out. Blair Witch in there. I just think of Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, a throwback to Bava, Gothic horror. I just, there's a lot of stuff in there. The 90s was actually pretty decent. Stephen King had his name all over the decade. Big surprise, right? But it was 90s is, and so for Wes Craven to come out in 94, get to return to that which left such an indelible mark on me as a young kid, and continue it forward, but in a new sort of meta-reflective sort of way, but laid the foundation for Scream. It's just fascinating to really get into that and to kind of like poke around and just see what Wes was really thinking, what he was up to, what he was trying to do. I think more than anything, it was laying a foundation for something a much bigger, if I can say that, bigger expression of some of these thoughts in what we would see in Scream, right, in 96. And so anyways, Wes Craven, his New Nightmare, definitely worth revisiting and re-looking at, and even when the broader scope of just thinking about film that is self-reflective, and what is it really trying to teach us or say to us, get us to think about. Don't forget Fulci's Cat in the Brain in there, of course, Scream, and even the Scream that is out now, which is a good film. But anyways, I probably talked too long already. I'm just going to go ahead and end off right there at week 434. It is Wes Craven's, God rest his soul, New Nightmare, and 1994 film. And recheck it out, man. And we always, of course, leave these things off with Go Bills.
This is not a dream. Not a dream.